initiated. I'll start 1 minute. Can you? Yeah, good. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to welcome you all back in the post-lunch session. So I request the participants who are a little bit behind to come forward so that you know the speaker can see you. You can see the speaker better. I'm trying to prep them. Okay, wait a little. So good afternoon. Welcome back. Next, we'll start with a keynote talk. We have a very special guest amongst us. This is Professor Shonalika Kaul. We're welcoming her from the Center for Historical Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Kaul is India's leading cultural and intellectual historian. specializing in Sanskrit literature. She is a professor at Center for Historical Studies at JNU and has been the Malathi Singh Distinguished Lecturer in South Asian Studies. Also at Yale University, USA, Jan Gonda Fellow in Indology, Leiden University at the Netherlands, and visiting Professor of History at Heidelberg University, Germany. She has published 9 internationally acclaimed books, including Imagining the Urban, Sanskrit and the City in Early India, published in 2010, The Making of Early Kashmir, Landscape and Identity in Rajatarangini, that's in 2018, and several more. She's been an invited speaker, avidly sought worldwide. Some of the prominent places that she's been visiting and giving talks as is in Paris, in Rome, at Stanford in USA, in Michigan, in Berlin, in South Africa, Australian National University, University of Kent and Liverpool, University of Warsaw and Sofia, the World Sanskrit Conference, and also at the United Nations in Geneva. So we're very honored to have her amongst us today. I'd like to now invite Professor Shonalika Kaul to talk on rethinking sustainability in the Bhagavad Gita, an emic perspective. Let's welcome her with a round of applause.
Am I audible? Yes, I believe I am. Namaskar, everyone. It is truly a privilege of a lifetime for me to speak on the Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ji. Therefore, I'm grateful to IIT Mandi and to the organizing committee of Ikshmaha for extending this very warm invitation. Anugrahitasmi. Now, based on a close reading of the Bhagavad Gita, my talk today is a somewhat contrarian one. It argues against the well-meaning but erroneous view that the modern sustainability doctrine is to be found in this ancient text from 2000 years ago. I will spend a good part of my talk today showing you how such interpretations actually might decontextualize select portions of the Gita, losing sight of the totality of its nature and function. I will argue for what is actually sacrosanct to a Sanskrit literary historian like me, which is to restore the Gita to its own logic and purpose, and thereafter, if at all, redefine sustainability in the light of this venerable text's own vision. Sustainability is, as per the Brundtland Commission report of 1987, and I quote, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, unquote. This understanding entails in the main social equity and environmental protection or ecological conservation. It is a deemed policy response to challenges that admittedly swamp the world today and threaten to cause its rapid destruction. What are these challenges? Consumerism, socioeconomic disparities, depletion of resources, and climate change. The precept of sustainability implies an intergenerational responsibility to keep the earth going longer than it might otherwise have at the present rate, and it implies a deference to planetary well-being over individual interest. I think I have adequately summarized what this doctrine of sustainability is. Now, if one searches the net with these keywords, sustainability in the Bhagavad Gita, a number of scholarly writings pop up which pick out and point to select ideas and phrases in the sacred text which, as per them, are nothing but sustainable thinking. These include Lok Sangraha, which they translate as welfare of the world, Nishkama Karma, translated by them as selfless action and therefore an inherent altruism. Yukta ahara vihara, that is minimalism of consumption, food ethics, balanced diet, and some have even read a cure for health disorders in this lofty Bhagavad Gita. Finally, they point to the concept of what they call divinity in all living beings, or what they call the unity of life in the Gita, which has been interpreted by them as an ecocentrism. So, ecology-centric view in the Gita, replacing an anthropocentrism, and by extension, promoting harmonious living with the world at large. This really is how sustainability in the Gita has been read. Now, all of these are no doubt wonderfully inspiring and hope-giving to a species, to a much beleaguered species and world, which is convinced that the end is near, and thanks to its own choices and actions. So it holds out a great beacon of hope. But whether the Gita is ecocentric or not, this modern understanding of man destroying the world certainly is anthropocentric. It is putting man or humans at the heart of this entire project of both destroying the world and therefore the need to sustain it. This is worth a thought. I am not commenting on the truth value of the statement that we are destroying the world. That's not what I'm commenting on here. I am simply saying that the doctrine of sustainability screams an acute sense of doership, karta bhav, insofar as it says that man is destroying the world and therefore it is man alone that can sustain it. Now, this karta bhav, need I say, is precisely what the Bhagavad Gita explicitly and very early warns against. Karta aham iti manyate ahankar vimuratma, chapter 3. Sustainability suggests a doership that is apparently driven, so the emphasis on the word apparently, driven by conscience, ethics, and social responsibility. The very qualities that Arjuna invoked to not go to battle on Dharamkshetra, Kurukshetra. And how did the Lord respond to that? Krishna tells Arjuna, quote, pragyanavadana bhashase, which is, you sound as if you make sense, but you don't. And then he deftly proceeds to demolish all of Arjuna's arguments, his rather sanctimonious arguments, and egg him on instead to what can only be called a sustainability nightmare, an apocalyptic war, the Mahabharata. Now, why? Why does Krishna do that? And what does this tell us about our modern insistence on reading sustainability into a work that may or may not yield to it? If any of this sounds like it is attempting to undermine a text of the Bhagavad Gita's greatness, I hasten to state that it is quite the opposite. What this talk will attempt today is in fact a reclamation of this text from the interpretation of it, or should I say a hijacking of it, by a 21st century concept and indeed fixation on saving the world. I will argue that the Gita would have a very different take on whether the world can be saved at all. I'll just show you what I mean. And I will push for restoring the text to its own logic and concerns. Both as a historian and also as an upasaka of the Gita, this is certainly of the essence for me. I will also argue that the Gita is not a public-facing text in the first place, and that it is a private discourse. Not just because it is addressed to an individual rather than to an assembly of people, but also because it stunningly addresses the interior life of even that one individual. That is what the Gita is concerned with, Arjuna's interior life, his mind, emotions, psychology, reflexes, pain, dilemmas, and his eventual rising above these. So it is a fundamentally human text, I submit, not an ecocentric one. And it is all about sustaining not the environment, not the outer world, but the inner world of the human. Antah sukhaha, antararamaha, antarjyotirev, chapter 5. And to also show that human, how their humanity is not a petty limitation or a liability, but something that transcends. Brahma bhuto adhigacchati. So I will argue that in terms of goals, functions, and emphasis, the Gita is not primarily a social text, unlike the rest of the Mahabharata. Less so an ecological text, but very much a soteriological and Gnostic text. Soteriology, I know you all are aware, means a text for salvation, for liberation. If anything, it is through its soteriology and the uplift of the individual persona and psyche which that requires, that the Gita redefines and overhauls the social as a collective of realized souls. That is Muni and Yogi, and not all living beings to be saved without discernment. That is not what the Gita is about. Having laid bare the working premises of my talk today, it is pertinent to begin with pointing out a very obvious fact. That Krishna, not once or twice, but throughout the Gita, makes it clear that the destruction of the world and all life forms inhabiting it is inevitable, apariharya. Indeed, it is preordained. It cannot be prevented, however demoralizing that sounds. He says, Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityuhu tasmat sarvani bhutani na tvam shochitum arhasi. Death is sure of that which is born, so don't grieve any living being. Dhiraha na muhyati. The steadfast are not deluded. So death in the Gita appears as both a constant and inconsequential. It's going to happen, is how the text treats it. What's more, Krishna tells us that it is he who is behind that destruction and the end of the world as we know it, and not humans. So he makes that clear. Kalo asmi lokakshaya lokan samahartum pravrittaha aham. Chapter 11. Mrityuscha aham. Chapter 9. Mrityu sarvaharascha. Chapter 10. And these are only a few of the references. I don't want to bog you down with a lot many, but there are there. Now, why is he the one who destroys the world? The reason for this also, the Gita tells us quite simply, that it is again God and not humans who created the world and who sustain it. At God's pleasure, at his will, through his prakriti. As he puts it, Vishvato mukhaha dhata aham, bijam sarva bhutam aham, Vishvasya param nidhanam aham, bhutani dharayami, bharta, bhokta, bhava apyayau hi bhutanam, bhut bhartricha, grasishnucha, prabhavishnucha. That is, I am the sustainer and destroyer of all living beings. So there goes the entire edifice of human doership that is presupposed by the sustainability doctrine. Both sustenance of life and its assured destruction. So, prabhavascha pralayas tatha, as the text puts it, emerge clearly in the Gita as being outside human purview. So this is not your business, is what the text says. In this perspective then, sustainability is a mere misconception. In a beautiful paradox, while the world is perishable thus, God or Brahman or Atman is Nityam Aksharam Sanatanaha Anadimadhyama Antaha Avinashaha Shashvataha. So constant, immutable, indestructible, eternal, without beginning, middle, or end. Ladies and gentlemen, this centerpiece of Vedanta and the Gita, and I dare say of Hinduism, the concept of Sanatana, renders the very idea of sustainability redundant. Why? Because that which endures cannot be sustained. It already sustains in this perspective. So in this meta vision, in this meta perspective, which touches both God and man, sustainability is a non sequitur. And even the material world, we are told, evolves and dissolves to again evolve in tune with the day and night of Brahma and through God's Prakriti, as chapter 8 tells us. So in this temporal understanding, in the circular temporal understanding of the material world too, not just the soul which is eternal, but the material world in this temporal understanding also makes sustainability immaterial. Because the show will go on. There will be evolution and there will be dissolution. Similarly, all the concepts I mentioned before that are marshaled in the sustainability in the Gita hypothesis can be shown up as lacking. In almost every case, they offer a noble but nonetheless mistaken reading of the intent and context in which the text presents them. So our job is to understand what the text wants to do, rather than demand of it that it do what we would rather. So do these terms, yukt, ahar, vihara, loka sangraha, etc., occur in the text? Of course they do, sure. But then any word can be picked up from anywhere as proof of anything. Let me give you an example. Critics of the Gita say that it promotes violence and bloodshed. You would have heard this. Thereby completely missing the purpose, context, and meaning of Krishna's exhortation to war. So if you leave out that part, that what is the text trying to do when it exhorts Arjuna to war, you will be led to this completely fallacious conclusion that the Gita promotes bloodshed and war and violence, completely misunderstanding what the text is trying to do. So similarly, no matter how benign and worthy the cause of sustainability today, it is important that it not come at the cost of the integrity of the text. That is the point I'm trying to make. Now, let's quickly look at each one of these concepts one by one. Yuktahara vihara, appropriate diet and behavior. Now, far from arising from a conservationist concern for minimizing consumption of the earth's resources, in the Gita, this concept is meant purely to facilitate yoga. That's what the text says if you listen carefully, and I'll show you. And what is this yoga? It is a state where you have overcome dvandva. You have overcome dualities or extremes, as chapter 7 and so many others in the text tell you. And why should you conquer these extremities or dvandva? In order to attain a steadiness of disposition. That is, sthairya, ruddha chitta. And why should you attain a steadiness of disposition? For the ultimate eventual attainment of Brahman thereby. That is the purpose of the Gita, to get you there. So, Yukta Ahar Vihar, therefore, is merely precondition for the attainment of Brahman, Brahmabhu, which alone is the goal. And the text tells you that. So, if you only listen carefully, look what it says, quote unquote. Yoga is not for the glutton or one who fasts too much. So, dvandva, neither extreme. So, it is not for the glutton, nor for one who fasts too much. It is not for the sleep heavy, nor for the sleepless. Unquote. So, yoga is being recommended as appropriate food and sleep. That is yoga. A purpose that is not ecological, need I say, but something that actually is about stilling the passions. Why? Because excessive consumption of food or excessive sleep is seen as working up the passions or inducing sloth. And both of these will not permit the attainment of yoga. So the text actually says that why still the passions? It tells you why. It's making a case for this. Why still the passions? Because kama kami na shantim apnoti. Chapter 2. There is no bliss for the passionate, for the impassioned. On the other hand, yoginam shanta rajasam sukham uttamam upayati. Chapter 6. The one with his passions controlled attains supreme bliss. Similarly, the second tenet of Sarva Bhutanam Maitraha Karuna, so compassion for all, is how this has been read. Or Samam Sarveshu Bhuteshu Tishthantam Parameshwaram, divinity in all beings, right? Now, this has been cited by sustainability, like I told you. But again, what is the purpose of this reference in the Gita? Read carefully and it's there. The purpose is not a display of compassion or ethics towards all living beings. That is not where the Gita is coming from. Here. Remember, Krishna dismissed Arjuna's own display of compassion earlier. Compassion and ethics. So he cannot be espousing the same emotion. He's not saying this from the point of view of emotion. For Krishna, the purpose is not emotion or ecology, but samadarshana or ekatvam sthitaha, which is writ large over the relevant chapter 12, where this reference comes from. Now, why samadarshana? He again explains to you. Is this about altruism? Is it about thinking about the beings of the world and saving them? As I said, eventually compassion. No, Krishna tells you why samadarshana. He says, quote, the play of duality, dvandva, of disgust and delight, flings all beings into delusion, sammohanam. Wise men free themselves from it and are devoted to me, unquote, chapter 7. So samadarshana, remember, is that state of equipoise that is affected by nothing. No fluctuations whatever in its outlook, regardless of who is in front. Krishna himself says that I have no friend and no foe. Nobody is my friend and nobody is my foe. That is samadarshana. Compassion would suggest everyone is my friend. Krishna is not saying that. He is saying whether it is your friend or your foe in front of you should not matter to you if you have attained the state of samadarshana. In other words, what I'm saying is that when Krishna says karuna, he means be kind to be calm, udasina, and not to be altruistic. The motivation is not ecological consciousness, but Brahma consciousness. That is the fundamental difference that I'm trying to insert into the discourse on sustainability in the Gita. And this Brahma consciousness is para. Ladies and gentlemen, monism is an unsentimental universe. So, however heartbreaking, compassion is merely a guna in this perspective that is to be transcended. Gunanatitya, chapter 14. So, it is not to be aspired for. So, compassion is not what the Gita is actually espousing, if you read closely. Now, the third sustainability tenet, nishkama karma, the most famous of them perhaps. Now, this means detached work and not selfless work. There is a difference between the two. And it has often been extrapolated as selfless work. And I think that's a kind of lazy interpretation, a lazy translation, because really what it is saying is nishkama, it is detached. The Lord himself is detached. Nishkama udasinam avadasinam asaktam teshu karmasu. Chapter 9. He says, Samo aham sarva bhuteshu na me dveshyo asti na priyaha. I hate none, I love none. He goes on further to shock you. He says, in fact, everyone has already been killed by me. So much for love and compassion, right? He says, everyone has already been killed by me, yet Nirvairah sarvabhuteshu aham. I hold no enmity to any. And in any case, he says, Brahman has nothing to do with, is not concerned with the doer or the deed. So he says, Na kartritvam na karmani lokasya srijati prabhuhu. This is just not the stuff of Brahman. Further, as Krishna says elsewhere, quote, a Brahmin, a cow, a dog, and an elephant are all the same samadarshana to an Atman knower, unquote, chapter 5. Now, this quote sounds like and has been celebrated as a kind of social justice. But I submit that it is actually an indifference to difference that he's talking about. So it's not a pro-equity position, but a pro-Atman position. That is why all of these that he names are the same to him. You will remember I said at the beginning that the Gita is primarily a soteriological and not a social text, in my understanding. And it is in the same constant context that is defining of the Gita that Lokasangraha too should be understood. Not as a welfareism, but as actually exemplifying for the world the ways of detachment, that is Sthita Pragya and Dhairya. The concerned verses in chapter 3 tell you that. This is not some interpretation of mine. The text is actually telling you what Lokasangraha is, and it is not welfare of the world in general. It is, quote, he says, as the ignorant works in an attached fashion, so the wise works in a detached way to educate the world. Lokasangraha. Educate the world in what? In the ways of detachment, in the ways of Sthita Pragya, equanimity. And why? Because he says, to make it clear, Yad pramanam kurute shreshtaha lokaha tad anuvartate. So what good men do will be imitated by the world. So he's making it very clear what Lokasangraha is here. It is not some selfless altruism for the world. It is showing the world how to live a detached life. That is what it is here. Reiterating that it is not altruism for all, Krishna tantalizingly says right after this, quote, the wise should not bother with trying to galvanize the dull-witted who are attached to their senses. So don't bother with them is what Krishna is saying. He says, Prakriter guna sanmudaha mandaha na vichalayet. He repeats this in chapter 4. This is chapter 3. And then he repeats it in chapter 4, where he uses words like the ignorant, the disrespectful, and the disbelieving, that they await ruin. He also says in chapter 18, don't repeat this message of the Gita to the cynical, the lazy, and the faithless, unquote. And he adds for good measure that Prakriti makes them what they are, so nothing can be done about it. He says that. Leave it as it is what he's saying, for those who may not make it. So Lokasangraha stands qualified by a distinct discernment that is recommended for this loftiest knowledge. Moksha is not some socialist project. It could be for anybody, but not for everybody. Only for the wise, for the muni, for the yogi, for the sannyasi. The text makes that very clear. Where does that leave us on sustainability then? I propose that the right question to ask is not, does the Gita espouse sustainability as we understand it? Because I hope to have shown today that it does not. But what does the Gita sustain? That might be the right question to ask. And the answer to that, as I have hinted throughout my talk today, is that the Gita sustains the interior life of the individual, the psycho-spiritual foundations of human existence. It provides a profile of the human condition that is so honest, engaging its susceptibility, its vulnerability, the human condition, to fluctuation, weakness, cowardice, grief, and collapse in an ever-changing material world. So the words he uses, Shudra Hridaya, Daurbalyam, Anadya Shokaha, Klaibyam. These are some of the weaknesses that the Gita is actually acknowledging in the human. So this is such an honest profile that actually the Gita is one of the most moving portraits of the human experience of this, what God calls this brief, joyless world. Anityam asukham loka. Or what he calls punarjanma dukhalayam shashvatam. So don't be reborn in this brief, joyless world because it is the abode of all sorrows. The God is telling you and admitting that. A world where our senses and emotions left unchecked run riot with our stability and our sense of self. That is what the Gita is portraying for you. So he talks about how violent senses rock the reason of the wisest man. The words he uses is chanchalam mana, balvad, pramadi, durnigraham chalam. So the mind is powerful, fickle, and violent. And I argue that this is the real Kaurava, this is the real enemy that the Gita is raging against, that the Gita is exhorting Arjuna to rise up against. It is not an enemy out there as much as it is the enemy within. And this is what he identifies that enemy with. It is not some value judgment-based enemy. It is simply the susceptibility of the human to fluctuations. Causing a cessation of that is what the Gita is prescribing for the ultimate sanity and stability of the human. As the Lord says, harassed are the runners after fruits of their actions. Kripanaha phalam hetavaha. Chapter 2. Ashantasya kutaha sukham. Where do the restless find joy? Indeed, the doubt-ridden are destroyed. Sanshayatma vinashyati. The unsteady mind, motivated by attachment, is trapped in its own reward. Unquote. So, it is precisely to emancipate the individual, to shelter him, upashritaha, sharanam, the words used, from the roller coaster that is life on earth, mrityu sansara sagarat, that the Gita strives. To render the individual free, vimuktaha, and unaffected by extremes, nirdvandvaha, and from sammohanam, from confusion and conflict. To render the individual unwavering of mind, sthitam manaha, buddhirekaha, happy of heart, prasanna chitta, self-possessed, jitatmanaha, tranquil, prashanta, stable and serene, sthira buddhi. This state is an outstanding exemplification of what Jivan Mukti means, which even before it is a metaphysical liberation, it is actually a psycho-neural liberation, if ever there was one. And eventually, this immediate goal of finding one's center or equipoise paves the way for the transcendent goal, namely, as I told you before, the attainment of Brahma Nirvana, which is eternal peace and joy. Para Shashvata Shantihi. Sukham Akshayam. Indeed, which is the attainment of Krishna himself. Mameva Anuttamam Gatim. Once attained, as the Lord tells us, Na me bhaktaha pranashyati. My worshipper is never destroyed. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the true promise of sustainability in the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Shonalika. That was so nice. And having been reading Gita for last 15 years, I must admit that I missed this entirely, this perspective. Not that I thought about it, but it was a new learning for myself, and I'm sure for our audience. We have time for maybe one question. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Mataji. So I have a question that you have told that the highest realization is realizing the Brahma. And should I tell louder, Mataji?
Please.
Yeah, so highest realization is realize the Brahma, but in Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 that you quoted that Shahasra Yoga Paryantam Aharyat Manovidu Ratrim Yoga Shahasrantam Teho Ratra Vidojana. So actually all the Chatur thing, then the 14 lokas actually destroys. He is a destroyer that you have also told. But in chapter 15 that I am just want to quote that Bhagavan tells that Na tad bhashayate suryo na shashanko na pavaka yad gatva na nivartante tad dhama paramamama. So there is a actually world that is spiritual world that in Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 it is actually told. And the sustainability form that you have told, it is about material world or the everything that you have already told? That's my question.
I actually don't see a contradiction between the passages that you were citing. I see them as actually consolidating the argument that I was making. Because even chapter 15, when he describes what can be attained and will be attained by the Bhakta, what is he talking about? It is nothing but Jivan Mukti, an eventual merger, of course, with God, with Godhead, right? So there is a logic to what he annuls, to what he rejects, as it were, and what he embraces when he is prescribing what he is to Arjuna.
Okay. And there is another question regarding Aksharam.
Follow up, you will have to.
Just one.
No.
Yeah.
We'll do later. Yes,
Sure.
later. Okay, so Professor Umashankar.
Madam, I just had a small observation. See, suppose if somebody has a cancer, sustainability there actually is removing the tumor. So the Lord, when he's advocating a war and violence, don't you think that's actually a form of sustaining dharma? Unless the adharma is destroyed, dharma cannot be sustained. So the whole idea of destruction there, isn't it about sustainability?
But within the larger construct of a constant chain of evolution and dissolution. So you might be able to save the world for now by a resort to dharma, which is what the Mahabharata war was supposed to be all about. But is that going to ensure ultimate lasting sustainability? It isn't. Because he tells you that everyone's already dead. Deal with it. Right? That's kind of what he's really telling you. It's a shocking revelation. It's a very hard-hitting revelation for any individual. And especially someone, if they may be in a condition, like you said, of illness and of pain and so on, what happens to them? What is their source of hope? But this is the ultimate hope that Krishna is holding out.
The second aspect of it is, he says the whole Prakriti is my Shakti. So isn't it sustainability is worshipping the divine? And why should we denounce it? The concept of why should we fighting that sustainability is not being advocated in the Bhagavad Gita? We could look at the world as a divine manifestation and respect it. Is it wrong?
The way I read his invocation of Prakriti was that Lord was actually being quite detached about it. He's actually underlining how the Prakriti is not him. It may be from him, but he is not from Prakriti. He is not attached and he is not in Prakriti. He says all living beings are in me. I am not in all living beings. He actually says as much. I could get you the quote from the larger paper. So that is fundamentally a detachment that he is asserting between the material world created via Prakriti, via the forces of Shakti, and him.
Yes.
Many manifestations in the world being himself as well.
Sir, can we take this offline? I'm sure.
Yeah. The entire chapter about Vibhuti Yoga explains how everything in nature is him. Sarasasa asmi sagaraha, aham Jahnavi, I am Ganges, I am oceans, I am moon, I am sun, I am Vibhutis. So he explains that as well.
Thank you. I think the talk has served its purpose. There are enough questions and probably debates which can be taken offline. So let's thank our speaker, Professor Shonalika, one more time, and now we'll felicitate her.
So we move ahead with the session, and in the next session we have our first invited speaker of Mbcc 2026, Dr. Krishna Abhishek Ghosh. I would just briefly introduce him and welcome him on the stage. Dr. Krishna Abhishek Ghosh is the Dean of the Faculty of Dharma Studies at Somaya Vidya Vihar University, a distinguished scholar of Hindu studies and South Asian religions. He specializes in Vaishnava traditions, Indian philosophy, yoga, meditation, and comparative religious studies. He received his MA and PhD from South Asian languages and civilizations from the University of Chicago and completed his MSc in theology and religious studies from University of Oxford. Dr. Ghosh has nearly 2 decades of international teaching, research, and academic leadership experience. Before joining Somaya Vidya Vihar University, he taught at institutions including Grand Valley State University and the University of Chicago, where he received the Dean's Award for Excellence in Teaching. He currently serves as Senior Editor of the Journal of Vaishnava Studies and Director of the Institute for Vaishnava Studies. His scholarly and public engagements focus on preserving and interpreting classical Indian knowledge systems for contemporary global audiences. Dr. Ghosh has represented India in international academic and cultural forums, including discussions connected with India's United Nations Security Council reform initiatives. His interdisciplinary approach promotes dialogue across Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, and other dharmic traditions while encouraging critical inquiry into religion, culture, ethics, and society. So I welcome Dr. Ghosh for the talk.
ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः. I begin by offering my respects to my teacher who has brought me from darkness to light by opening my eyes with the torchlight of wisdom. Are you able to hear me? Okay, good. So I know this is a post-lunch session, and so I will make my talk less theoretical, more practical. How many of you have heard of the University of Chicago? You know, one of the highest number of Nobel laureates are associated with that university. And if you go to the university store, you will find a t-shirt saying, "It works in theory, how does it work in practical?" Right? So everybody theorizes everything all the time. But I promise you today I'm not going to do that. The topic of our conversation today afternoon, and I'll try to keep it very short and leave ample time for questions and answers. The topic for today is Krishna Bhakti and the Yoga Sutras. Now, many years back, when I began my journey exploring what is dharma, I could not pinpoint and find one answer. How many of you think dharma is duty? I see some hands. Dharma is justice. Okay, I see some hands. Dharma is law. I see some hands. Dharma is cosmic order. Yes. And today afternoon I was having lunch with Pandit Ajay Chakraborty, and he'll have a performance for you tonight here. And I was in his presence, he just suddenly began to break out into his music. And I was observing him, and I found out that, this is a soul who has found his dharma. So when I witness someone like him, isn't dharma also purpose? So dharma is one term that is very versatile. It doesn't have one definition. But how do you find your dharma is my first question today. And my simple, easy answer to that is, you find your dharma through a process of yoga that suits you. Not everybody is going to do the same kind of yoga. Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Dadami buddhi yogam tam. If you come to me and if you if you're trying to do my service, I give you that Buddhi Yoga. But Buddhi Yoga and Gyan Yoga is different. If you go to Yoga Sutras, there is Kriya Yoga. And the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Vishada means despondence, depression, dejection. Even that is a form of yoga, because in every crisis there is an opportunity, depending on how you are able to connect with your deeper self, take shelter and move ahead. So your dharma can be reached through yoga. But why? Why do you bother about any of this? Why can't we just sit and doom scroll all day? It's so much fun, no? There is more entertainment on our iPhone screens than in the library of Shastras you can discover anywhere. And the answer to that is very simple. The answer is rasa. These three, dharma, yoga and rasa, are essentially what can be called sambandha, abhidheya and prayojana. I'll explain each of those terms of any spiritual system. If you look at Christianity, if you look at Islam, you look at Buddhism, any spiritual system will have something called sambandha, the foundations that are all interconnected. Once you have that knowledge, what you do with it is abhidheya. If you go to the United States, where I live half my year, you go to Italy, which is very, very religious, they say Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, this, that. What do you do after that? Well, you go to church on Sundays and you pay a part of your salary to the church. So you have to do something after you get some knowledge. That is called abhidheya. And the purpose, what you feel inside, is called prayojana. Prayojana means purpose. Sambandha is realized through the practice of dharma. Abhidheya is yoga. And prayojan is rasa. Especially if you listen to Krishna, where he is saying, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braja. Give up all your varieties of dharma, just come to me. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshashyami ma suchaha. Don't worry. Okay? So what I wanted to do is I run thought experiments, and this is my thought experiment with every author I read, whether it's Charles Dickens or Maharshi Patanjali. I read a book, and then I tell in my mind, if I met Maharshi Patanjali in, I'm making this up now, C.V. Raman elevator, I have 7 seconds with him. But I run this experiment. If I had 7 seconds with an author, what is the gist of what this author is trying to tell me? I asked this question to Krishna after reading the Bhagavad Gita. And the answer was, don't worry, just surrender to me. That was less than 2 seconds. I asked the same question to Maharshi Patanjali. And you know what happened? I asked this question and I asked this question. I was confused. Because Yoga Sutra is so terse. You can read it any way you want. You can read it any way you want. And then I came to the conclusion that Yoga Sutra is like a mirror. If you read the book, it will give to you whatever it is you come to it with. But the quality of what you get is very different from what you approached it with. And I want to, because it's a post-lunch session, and this is IIT, I'm going to run a small thought experiment. You ready for this? Ready? We are going to, how many of you don't know how to do simple arithmetic where you add single digits to single digits? Anybody here? We all know how to add numbers. Okay. When you add, I'll decide a number, 9. 9 is okay? Add any single digit to 9. Give me a single number. Anybody raise your hand? Tell me a number. Yes. 2. So add 2 plus 9. What do you get? When you add 1 plus 1, what do you get? All right, let's do another number. Somebody choose a number that is not 2. 7. All right, let's add 7 plus 9. Huh? 1 plus 6 is? After going through the whole process, are you returning to the same number? This is how spiritual traditions and texts transform us. Externally, we remain the same, but the journey has returned us to ourselves. That's what yoga does to us. Any form of yoga, if it's genuine, that's what it will do to you. You will come back to yourself different, but transformed. And yet, you are uniquely you. Okay? Ready? So now, what is the process of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra? He says, Atha Yoganushasanam, that now let us begin our journey, our discipline in yoga. Yogaha chitta, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. How many of you have heard of this before? For the 21 years I have lived in the United States, everybody thought yoga means going to the gym or the yoga studio. And the first time I came to the United States, they said, have you been to a yoga studio here? And I said, no, what's a yoga studio? So I thought, जैसे film studio होता है, audio recording studio होता है, there must be something called like a yoga studio. They record some, I had no idea. For the first time I saw that you actually have dedicated spaces where it costs $12 a class. And you have all kinds of yoga. Beer yoga. You know what beer yoga is? Yeah. You do your stretches and you keep a beer bottle next to you. And when you're doing your downward dog and your head is closer to the ground and your hand is closer to the bottle, you take. Have you heard of goat yoga? आप लोग हंस रहे, लेकिन ये वास्तव है. This is reality. Have you heard of goat yoga? In a big field, they take you and then there are little goats going around. Meh. And they charge you premium price for that. There are all kinds of yoga. There is something called Christian yoga. Surya Namaskar, S-U-N salutation, there becomes sun salutation, S-O-N salutation. उसका मतलब ही बदल गया. लेकिन है ये सब. So in a world that is so filled with varieties of distractions, I think it is important to go back to the manual. Yoga Sutra says, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga means pausing the fluctuations, the waves, the turbulence of one's chitta. And what is that chitta? In his commentary, Srila Vyasadeva says, chitta is manas, buddhi, ahankar. Your mind, your intelligence, and your identities are constantly in flux, constantly changing. How many of you have found yourself returning home with a bad mood after a hard day at work? You know why? That manas, buddhi, ahankar means identity, false ego. It is still stuck in the office while the body is at home. The identity has not shifted. And this is a fluctuation of one's identity. When one is a parent, there is one identity. When one is a boss, there is another identity. When one is a taxpayer, tax season, people are upset, frustrated. Itna kyun le raha hai? Right? All of these are identities, and vrittis are these fluctuations of identities. When you pause these vrittis, tada drashtu swarupe avasthanam, then the true you becomes situated in yourself, in who you really are. Vrittir sarupyam itaratra. And if you don't, you become the madness of your mind. This is ancient Indian psychology grade 1. This is where it starts. But the big question is, those who are doing Krishna Bhakti, have you seen people in Krishna Bhakti? Kabhi log pagal ho jate hain. Have you seen that popular meme? It says, Brindavan ka pagal khana hai. If you see people doing bhakti, they are crying and they are dancing and they are preparing food and offering it to a murti of Krishna, and they swear by Krishna. So how did yoga, that is essentially chitta vritti nirodha, pausing the fluctuations of the mind, end up being that? How can we call this yoga? That is the question I started with one time I was reading the Yoga Sutras. And the answer to this is there in the Yoga Sutras itself. Patanjali Muni says that samadhi can be attained by Ishvara Pranidhana. Pranidhana in Sanskrit is prapatti in Tamil and Sanskrit. By surrendering to Ishvara, one gets the perfection of yoga. Samadhi siddhir Ishvara Pranidhanat. And how does that happen? Well, who is Ishvara? Ishvara is Purusha Vishesha, a specific person. There is personality of Ishvara. And what is the nature of Ishvara? Tasya Vachaka Pranava. The sound Om is the Vachaka, is the indicator of what Ishvara is. And how do you get to the perfection of Samadhi? Tad japas tadartha bhavanam. Japa and the meditation on the meaning of what it is. I want to conclude, of course, this is a long book. I have been composing a commentary, a Vaishnavite commentary on the Yoga Sutras. It has never been done before. And again, I ran a thought experiment that if I were in a spiritual reality where I could spend one afternoon in Radhakund in the company of Sri Radha and her companions, what kind of a Yoga Sutra would I explain? Because yoga, otherwise Yoga Shastra can be very boring. Would I like to bore such people? No. So then one of my friends and mentors, Professor Shrikant Bahulkar, great Sanskritist, he said that you write a commentary called Rasika Priya. Rasika Priya, commentary on the Yoga Sutra. So I started composing it. Like, what, if I had to write a commentary that would please Sri Radha and explain Yoga Sutras to her, what would that sound like? And I've started writing it, and I'm only going to give you one story from the conclusion. Ready? So once upon a time, a Yogi Raj was traveling through Bharat Bhumi, India, and he chanced across a beautiful forest on a moonlit night, and he fell in love with the place. So he sat down, he began to meditate, he began to control his senses, his mind, his intelligence. Slowly, he began to enter a state of samadhi. And as he began to relish his samadhi, he got one tight kick, and his samadhi broke. Kya hua? He was startled and he was trying to figure out. And he just heard chan, 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 and the sound disappeared. So he was very upset, and out of his anger he cursed, whoever broke my samadhi may never experience samadhi in their life. Whoever broke my samadhi may never experience samadhi in their life. Aise abhishap deke, uttered a curse. He was very upset, and he gradually again began to meditate, and he got back to his samadhi. Next morning, as the sun rose and his eyes opened with the rays of the sun, he saw a beautiful young girl, age of her child, sitting right in front of him. And somehow, because he was a yogi and his memory is very strong and he has keen perception, he realized that maybe those ankle bells were sounding last night, and whoever kicked must have been this. And so the yogi asked, "Why did you kick me?" Yogi asked, "Why did you kick me?" And the girl got startled this time. He says, "I kicked you? Impossible." And Yogi says, "I'm pretty sure it was you. I heard the sound. I have some faint reflection. You were running last night." And this girl turned red out of embarrassment. He says, don't tell anybody. In my village, there is a young boy who is a rascal. He has given us an indication that the party is at night. And the indication is he goes to the forest and starts playing the flute. And when he starts playing the flute, I don't know what happens. I have to escape. Nobody knows at home. मैं तो भाग रहा था कल रात. योगी जी, क्षमा करिए, forgive me. I must have tripped on you. And at that moment, the yogi realized that with all his efforts to get into samadhi, his samadhi was very fragile. But this girl is in love with somebody, and her samadhi is much more strong and much more perfect than what he could ever accomplish with his whole lifetime of yoga. So my friends, that is what samadhi is in bhakti yoga. The Brahma Samhita says, Premanjana churita bhakti vilochonena. When your eyes are tinged with the salve of love, everything you look around changes. And so you are not experiencing samadhi by your own efforts. And Krishna says in the Gita that, there is the impersonal on which you can attempt to experience by your own efforts. And that's it is possible, but it's a long-winded path. And sometimes I used to teach my daughter, when she was very young, he said, when you want to keep people busy, you ask them that, show me 2 ways of showing your nose. And say, this is way 1. It's also correct. But it is a long-winded path. And Krishna says that those who surrender to me attain me very easily. And that's the lesson that the yogi realized that morning, that he was in Brajabhumi, the girl was in love with Krishna, and her samadhi on Krishna was much stronger than his samadhi on the Paramatma through years of practice. And that is Krishna Bhakti and the Yoga Sutras for you. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions? We have someone here.
We have time for 1 or 2 quick questions.
Okay. He's here. There is somebody here.
Hello. So actually, I read a little bit of the compilation of commentaries by Edwin F. Bryant on Yoga Sutras. So he says that the Ishwar Pranidhani part of the practice, it pops up and it's a little bit unusual that why it is coming in yoga, and he kind of gives a kind of suggestion that since Patanjali is attributed with Anant Shesha, so he is like giving bhakti in a veiled form in Yoga Sutras. So
In a what form?
veiled.
Weird. Oh.
No, V-E-I-L-E-D.
Veiled. Okay.
So what is your perspective on that? Do you think it's like that?
First of all, I think he's right. Here is how I look at it. Vedanta is very open-ended. And then once you start reading Vedanta, you can go down the Advaita path or you can go down the Bhakti path. So there is Advaita Vedanta and Bhakti Vedanta. Sankhya is Nirishwara Vading. Sankhya, there is no Ishvara. Till yoga comes and complements the Sankhyan system with an Ishvara. Yoga is the only school among the 6 schools of Vedic philosophy which has specific Ishvara. Vedanta has Brahman. Mimamsa has Apurusha. It is not made by a Purusha. Right? Only with the evolution of Indian thought, the question of where the place of devotion becomes very prominent. Now, as the yoga tradition, the earliest layer of the yoga shastras in the Patanjalian tradition is not very specific. It's very open-ended, just like Vedanta. And Shankara wrote his commentary, Vijnana Bhikshu wrote his commentary. And what Edwin Bryant has done is he has taken all these commentaries, given his summary, but he himself has practiced Ishvara Pranidhana in his own way, and therefore he suggested what he suggested. Now his interpretations are much more in line with what the traditional commentaries point to. What I am doing is I am breaking the bounds of those commentaries and following the path of Jiva Goswami. Srila Jiva Goswami looks at Janmadhyasya Yataha of Vedanta and says that this is not the Janmadi Asya Yataha, which means the birth, creation and dissolution of the universes. This is Sri Krishnasya Janma. Right? So that's why at the end I say, Premanjana Churita Bhakti Vilochanena. When you start seeing things with your eyes tinged with the salve of love, and this is the translation of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, you will naturally see Krishna. I mean, इसको बोलता है प्यार का पागलपन, लेकिन ये प्यार भगवान से है. That's the only difference. So, what Edwin Bryant is doing is saying, हाँ वहाँ पर है. What I am doing is, आके पी लीजिए. You see the difference? But we are pointing to the same thing.
Yeah, so just one more thing was
Sure.
that so in the, I think, Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, they explain that Adi Shankaracharya, he gave a specific commentary for that specific time and place, but actually that he was a devotee of Lord Krishna in that sense.
He is called Bhagavat Pad.
So does that also apply to Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, is what I was...
Some people will say no, some people will say yes. My Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that there are debates you cannot solve with yukti. It boils down to your own ruchi. They'll be able to see that, yogena chittasya padena vacha malam sharirasya cha vidyakena, ye jo hai, ye to ananta dev hai, ye ananta dev ka avatar hai. Vaishnava tradition mante hai ye. Vaishnavas accept Patanjali Muni as an incarnation of Ananta, and so he is the original guru, and in his form as the guru, he teaches yoga for the chitta, he teaches grammar for vacha, for speech he gives grammar, and he gives medicine for the healing of the body. That's what he contributes. Okay? Alright, am I done, or any questions? Oh, we have a question.
Just a comment actually.
Huh.
As you said, yo yatha mam prapajyate tam tadeva bhajamyam. Ishvara is infinite and you can approach him in infinite ways, so we are not debating that. But I'm just questioning the interpretation of the equalization of prapatti with pranidhana. Pranidhana, prakrishna nidhana. Complete placement will be the meaning in this thing. So traditional interpretation of Vyasa Bhashya, that it is placing the mind completely on Ishvara as Omkara or with a form, Yatha Abhimata Dhyanadva, according to that sutra. So maybe it is not right to equalize that with prapatti, which is surrendering of one's ego and one's existence. Pranidhana is one of the Kriya Yogas, something that has to be done and practiced. So just want to know your comment about
Thank you. You are right, but I also think that pranidhana is a very basic form of prapatti. Prapatti is much more deep. Prapatti sharanagati. And it has 6 very specific limbs. Dainya, Atma Nivedan, so and so and so forth. So you are right, but I was using it in like, prema and bhakti. They are similar, but prema is a much more condensed version of bhakti. I was kind of using it as a shorthand. Okay. Thank you for the comment. Okay.
We thank Dr. Abhishek for this beautiful talk and for simplifying the hard things in such simple and connected, relatable language. We thank you, sir. And I think we will proceed with the next session, which is a special session on Ayurveda. So I will like to welcome Dr. Oh, sorry, sir. Sir, felicitation. I forgot. Extremely sorry.
You're talking about Krishna and Krishna appeared. Thank you.
Yeah, so I welcome Dr. Rama Jayasundar and Dr. Adluri on the stage for continuing the day 2 of the special session on Ayurveda.
So, Namaskar and good afternoon. Welcome to this special session on Ayurveda, the first part of which took place yesterday. So, there were a list of very illustrious speakers yesterday covering a range of topics, unique topics, from plant consciousness to animal consciousness to adolescent health from both modern and Ayurvedic perspective. Today is going to be no less. So we have very, very eminent speakers working in very niche areas of various aspects of Ayurveda. So they are going to talk on a range of very interesting topics, and there's also going to be contrasting perspective from a modern science as well. So my co-chair, Professor Shankar Adluri, will introduce the speakers and the theme.
So, thank you, Professor Rama. We are back with the second part of the Ayurvedic session, and the theme of this particular session, the key thematic session, is actually toxins and their effect on mind and consciousness. Ayurveda has 8 angas, out of which one of them is completely dedicated to the study of agadas, which are preventives and toxins. So that was so much of importance was given to the role of toxins on human mind, human existence, etc. It was made a key speciality. So with that understanding, this session was conceived, and to set the right tone to it, we wanted to start it from how modern medicine, in particular, we initially had this discussion as who is the right person to talk about management of toxins. There's something called as toxicology and forensic medicine that all MBBS graduates go through. And then we realized that actually forensic medicine practitioners rarely get to see the manifestations of toxin. They only get to see the end result, that is death. So we thought that's not the right perspective, and so we requested Dr. Ghansham, who's a very senior intensivist and critical care practitioner, to talk us about how they look at toxins, internal, external, and what all goes into the recognition of them and decision making. So with that brief introduction, I thought I'll introduce Dr. Ghansham. Dr. Ghansham Jagatkar is Director of Critical Care in Medicover Hospitals, Hyderabad. And his professional summary is that he's a dynamic and experienced intensivist with a distinguished career in critical care medicine, clinical leadership, and medical education. He has strong interests in nutrition, critical care, and medical ethics. He is recognized nationally for contributions to academic writing, leadership roles in professional societies, and commitment for education and ethics in critical care. He's qualified with in bioethics and applied ethics with an MBA from BITS Pilani. He's a fellow of Indian College of Critical Care Medicine. He's got an FNB degree apart from his MD and MBBS. He's presently the Director of Critical Care in Medicover Hospitals, which is a leading multidisciplinary critical care center. Development and implementation of critical protocols. He's got membership in academic trainings, and he's got a leadership role which includes lots of them. The most notable being he's the General Secretary of the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine. So I think with that brief introduction, I welcome Dr. Ghansham Jagatkar to talk about when the brain goes silent, toxins and the critically ill brain from the lens of an intensivist. Welcome, Dr. Jagatkar.
Thank you, Dr. Shankar Prasad. I fondly call him SP. He is my senior from my medical college and very important figure for those who passed out MBBS from Gandhi Medical College when he was doing his post-graduation. When he first asked me to speak on this topic, I was very excited. I thought it's something which is got to do with my routine intensive care practice. And but when I understood the whole theme of the meeting and when I was listening to the previous two speakers, and pardon me if I've gotten this wrong, right? To my very, very small brain and understanding, I realized that the entire concept of the theme or the consciousness, the discussions were about how one can understand oneself, right? Understanding consciousness beyond the realms of what we think about as consciousness. Now, and I kind of understood or had a brief idea that it's not an easy task, right? And then I looked at myself and I am talking about trying to understand what is happening to the brain of a patient who is admitted to me. When I am not able to understand what's happening at my own consciousness level, I realize that trying to understand at somebody else's consciousness is much more difficult. Right? Now, I thought I would see a lot of medical students. So my slides may look technical, but I'll try to make it as generalized as possible, and to kind of make it more into the perspective. I'll try to take you through a common case scenario, which is very, very common in our day-to-day lives. And I'm sure if some of you who's ever, unfortunately, if any of your family members were admitted to the intensive care unit, would have faced a similar situation. Now, this is something which is very, very common to me as an intensive care specialist. Before I proceed, the other thing that came to my mind when I was given to speak about the impact of toxins and the brain is, generally whenever we talk about toxins, the first thing that comes to our mind is some kind of poisons or some kind of toxin substances which are introduced into our body from an external source. What I am going to try to do is try to take you through what happens to the mind of a critically ill patient where toxins are produced within his own body. Toxins are not introduced from outside environment. To some extent, some of the interventions that we do as modern day practitioners may contribute to that, but majority of the changes are happening within his own body and how they impact his mind and consciousness. So just to kind of set in the perspective, let us go through this very, very simple case scenario, and this is very, very common. Trust me, this is something which I see day in and day out in my life when I treat patients in the intensive care unit. Elderly guy, a diabetic hypertensive, smoker for a long time, has presented to the ICU, has fever for 2 days. His heart rates are slightly on the higher side. Blood pressure at admission is okay. He's saturating well and he's completely conscious. In fact, he is a person who is giving his own complaints. And within a few hours or days of his coming to the ICU, right, his organs start to dysfunction. His blood pressure goes down. So we need to start supports, which is very, very common. We start medication, which tries to get the blood pressure up. His kidneys shut down. He stops to produce urine. So he started on dialysis support. Since he was not breathing well, we had to put him on the ventilator. A CT scan of the abdomen was done, suspecting that there could be some infection in the kidneys, which is again very common. So there was some pyelonephritis in medical terminologies, which is infection in and around the kidneys. And he was initiated on antibiotics, right, which is again a very, very common thing. So by now he is on multiple organ supports for his lungs, for his blood pressures, for his ventilation, right? And a couple of days down the line, the antibiotics start to work. He shows signs of recovery. His blood pressure stabilized. The supports that we were giving to stabilize his blood pressures were taken off. antibiotics were continuing because they need to continue through a course, through a complete course. We stopped the sedation and we tried to wake him up. The problem at this point of time is he doesn't wake up. Right? He makes some kind of movements, but he is not responding when we try to call his name, when you ask him to do something, and he just responds when you give him a painful stimuli. Apart from that, there is nothing much happening. Right? So when he came to us, he was completely conscious, but now he is in a state where we are not able to understand what is happening, and this typically follows again a whole set of investigations. We try to do an MRI to see if there is something wrong in his brain, because he was a diabetic, hypertensive, possibility that something could have gone wrong. MRI was normal, his EEG was normal. There were a few lab abnormalities, like the sodium was on the lower side, creatinine and urea were elevated, which is what happens in a patient with kidney injury. Brain infections were ruled out. Now, we would love to do a drug screen, but then logistically it is not very easily available at the bedside. So, by and large, in day-to-day clinical practice, we don't do a drug screen. So, the question is, why did his brain, his organs which were failing at some point of time, his organs stabilized, but his brain did not wake up? Why, despite having a clinical response to his initial condition, his brain was not completely normal, or why was he not completely conscious as compared to the day he came to us? Now, when you look at the brain from the perspective of modern medicine, brain is an organ, though it's a very, very small organ, almost 70 to 80% of the patients who are admitted to the ICU can have an impact on their brain functions, because one, it is a metabolically very, very active organ. And just like every cell and tissue needs energy and substrate, unfortunately, brain is not an organ which can store its substrate. So, it is continuously dependent on a constant supply of blood and oxygen. So, any situation where there is any kind of interruption in either the blood supply or oxygen supply to the brain can suffer irreparable or irreversible damage. Now, there is something called as a blood-brain barrier in medical terminology. Now, the brain is very well protected from the harmful effects of everything else that happens on the body. So, it's like there is some kind of a gatekeepers, right, which only allow those substances which are useful to the brain to enter into the brain and prevent any kind of a toxic or any kind of a harmful substance from reaching the brain cells by rejecting them. Right. Now, what happens in a critically ill patient is this barrier function is lost. So, where the brain cells were able to differentiate between harmful substances and prevent them from accessing the brain, that ability is lost, and now the brain is exposed to all kinds of metabolites, all kinds of drugs, all kinds of toxins which the body is producing. To couple this, in modern medicine, especially at high-end intensive care unit, we give lots of drugs. I mean, we love to give drugs. You have fever, you take paracetamol. You have infection, you take an antibiotic. You have pain, you take a painkiller. You don't get sleep, take a sedative. So, as we will love to give drugs. And if the patient is very sick, we love to give more drugs. And in a critically ill brain, all these drugs together can have a compounding effect. And we are talking about extremes in the intensive care unit, where we are talking about life and death situations. We are looking at the extremes of what normal situation is like. You and me, we don't even think of whether we are breathing or not. It's constantly happening at the back of our mind. How many of us actually think that we are breathing? But a sick patient, when he's struggling to breathe, he's spending a lot of energy to breathe. We don't do that. Right? So, we are dealing at a situation where there are extremes of things happening which can have a profound impact on the brain. That is precisely why, though being a very, very small organ within the physical structure of the body, it is subjected to a lot of variabilities or variations. And as I said, in modern medicine, sometimes it's very, very easy to kind of know the actual impact if I know what the toxin is. It's very simple. Like, for example, the one here, organophosphorus poisonings, what we commonly the one here, right? Most of you would be familiar with the farmers committing suicide. The most common agent that you hear this suicide is happening is because of that drug, that compound, which is a kind of a pesticide which is sprayed on your fields, on your crops, right? And we know very specifically that if somebody comes with a toxin, what to do. It's very simple. You have an antidote. You try to kind of counter the effects of the toxin with that kind of antidote. Similarly, if you have toxins which are introduced into your body because of certain animal bites, for example, say snake, there is specific anti-snake venom. So you give the injections which will counter the effects of the snake envenomation. So that's in a kind much more simpler when you know that somebody has taken an external toxin, because I have to just give the antidote. But when it comes to a patient who's admitted to the intensive care unit, it's not that simple.